Did you know that the candy that melts in your mouth, not in your hand, was born from a wartime observation? Or that the toy that walks downstairs was an accident on a naval battleship? The Second World War was a period of intense, focused innovation, and nations poured resources into creating better weapons, faster planes, and stronger defenses. The goal was victory, but inside the labs, factories, and even on the front lines, something else was happening. It was a storm of accidental genius. People under pressure, trying to solve one problem, would stumble upon a solution for something else entirely. A failed attempt to create synthetic rubber gave us a bouncy, useless putty that became a beloved toy. A way to protect soldiers from insects in the Pacific jungles led to the aerosol cans we use for everything from hairspray to spray paint. The war was a machine of destruction, but it was also an unintentional incubator for ideas that would shape our peaceful, everyday lives in ways no one could have predicted. How did the urgent need to win a war end up filling our homes with convenience, fun, and even life-saving medicine? And what does it say about innovation that so many of our modern comforts are the ghosts of a global conflict? Number 18. What if a failed rubber substitute bounced its way into toy history? The story of Silly Putty begins with a problem. In the early 1940s, the world was at war, and supply lines were stretched thin. Japan had control of many of the world's rubber-producing regions in Asia. For the United States, this was a crisis. Rubber was essential. It was needed for truck tires, for aircraft parts, for boots, for gas masks. The government put out a call to scientists and engineers across the country. Find a substitute for rubber, and find it fast. At a General Electric lab in New Haven, Connecticut, an engineer named James Wright was working on this exact problem in 1943. He was mixing different materials, hoping to create a new compound with the properties of rubber. He tried mixing boric acid with silicone oil. The result was not what he expected. It wasn't a stable, useful rubber substitute. Instead, he got a gooey, strange substance. It stretched farther than rubber. It bounced 25% higher than a rubber ball. It could even lift images from newspaper comics. But it was useless for making tires or boots. It had no practical military application. It was, by all accounts, a failure. The stuff was nicknamed Nudie Putty and passed around the lab as a curiosity, but GE couldn't find a use for it. The war ended, the rubber shortage eased, and the putty sat on the shelf, a solution without a problem. For years, it remained a scientific oddity. Then, in 1949, the putty found its champion. Peter Hodgson, an unemployed advertising copywriter, saw its potential. He'd seen it at a party where it was being shown off as a novelty. He borrowed $147 to buy the production rights from General Electric. He packaged small 1-ounce blobs of the putty into plastic eggs and decided to market it as a toy. He renamed it Silly Putty. At first, sales were slow. It was a strange product that nobody understood. The breakthrough came in 1950 when a writer for the New Yorker magazine stumbled upon it. The magazine wrote a short piece about this bizarre new toy. Suddenly, the demand exploded. Hodgson sold more than 250,000 Silly Putty eggs in just 3 days. It became one of the biggest toy fads of the century. Children loved its strange properties. You could stretch it, bounce it, break it, and famously press it onto a comic strip to copy the image. By the time of Hodgson's death in 1976, his company was selling millions of Silly Putty eggs a year. It was a massive success, all born from a failed government research project. Even astronauts on the Apollo 8 mission took it into space to help secure tools in zero gravity, finally giving it a practical, albeit small, purpose beyond play. The story of Silly Putty is a perfect example of accidental discovery. A substance created for a serious wartime need found its true calling in the hands of children. But what if James Wright had just thrown his failed experiment in the trash? How many other useless materials created during the war were simply discarded without a second thought? And what does it say about innovation that a substance's true value might be completely unrelated to its intended purpose, waiting for someone with a different perspective to see its potential? Number 17. Could a spring designed for a battleship change the way children play? In 1943, the world was deep in conflict. At the cramped shipbuilding yard in Philadelphia, a naval mechanical engineer named Richard James was working on a serious problem. He was trying to develop a special kind of spring. This spring would be used to support and stabilize sensitive instruments on naval ships. The constant rocking and violent vibrations of a ship at sea could easily damage delicate equipment. James needed something that could absorb shock and keep the instrument steady, no matter how rough the waters. One day, while working with different tension springs, he accidentally knocked one off his desk. Instead of just clattering to the floor, the spring did something fascinating. It gracefully walked itself down from the desk to a stack of books, and then to the floor, where it coiled up neatly. It was a moment of pure serendipity. The spring was a failure for its intended military purpose. It was too unstable, too floppy. But in that moment of failure, James saw something else. He saw a toy. He took the spring home to his wife, Betty. At first, she was skeptical. What was it? But after watching her husband and the neighborhood children play with it for hours, she saw the simple magic in the coiled wire. She was the one who saw its true potential. She searched the dictionary for a name and found the perfect word, Slinky. It was a Swedish word meaning sleek and graceful. In 1945, with a $500 loan, the Jameses founded James Industries. They found a machine shop in Philadelphia that could produce 400 of the toys. Their first attempt to sell the Slinky was a disaster. Toy stores weren't interested. It was just a piece of wire, they said. It looked like nothing. Discouraged but not defeated, they got permission to set up their own demonstration at the Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia during the 1945 Christmas season. Richard James set up a small ramp and sent a Slinky walking down it. At first, people just walked by. Then a small crowd gathered, then a bigger one. They were mesmerized. In just 90 minutes, they sold all 400 Slinkies they had produced. The toy was a phenomenon. The Slinky became a classic, a staple of childhood for generations. Over 300 million have been sold worldwide. And it has been used in classrooms to demonstrate the properties of waves. It has been used by soldiers in Vietnam as a makeshift radio antenna. Its simple, elegant design, born from a naval engineering problem, captured the imagination of millions. It's a perfect reminder that innovation doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes the most brilliant ideas are the ones that fall right off your desk. But what if Richard James hadn't been clumsy that day? What if the spring had just fallen flat on the floor instead of walking? How many other potential toys were hidden inside military hardware, never to be discovered? And is there a lesson here about how sometimes the most important quality of an invention is not its utility, but its ability to inspire simple joy? Number 16, did a quest for a clearer gun sight lead to the end of scratch glasses? During the Second World War, precision was a matter of life and death. For pilots, a clear view was everything. The plastic canopies of fighter planes and the lenses in bomber gun sights were constantly getting scratched and abraded. Dust, dirt, and the general wear and tear of combat could reduce visibility and compromise a mission. The military needed a solution. They needed a material that was as transparent as glass but far more durable and resistant to scratching. The challenge was taken up by the American Optical Company, but the real breakthrough came from a different company entirely, working on a related problem. In 1940, a chemist at the Pittsburgh Plate Glass PPG Industries named Frank W. Preston was working on a project to create a lightweight, shatter-resistant plastic. The goal was to use it in aircraft, specifically for fuel tanks that could withstand some damage. The project was part of a broader government initiative called the Columbia Southern Project. They were experimenting with a whole series of thermosetting plastics. One particular version, the 112th in the series, was a clear, liquid resin. They called it Columbia Resin 39, or CR39 for short. The material was promising. It was lightweight and much more shatter-resistant than glass. But its curing process was very slow, taking up to 100 hours. This made it impractical for the large-scale, rapid production needed for wartime fuel tanks. The military moved on to other materials. CR39 was another wartime project that ended up on the shelf, deemed not quite right for the job. After the war, the Armorlight Lens Company got its hands on the formula for CR39. They saw a different potential. The material wasn't great for giant fuel tanks, but what about something smaller? What about eyeglass lenses? At the time, almost all lenses were made of glass. They were heavy, they shattered easily, and they could be dangerous. Armorlight realized that CR39's properties were perfect for eyewear. It was half the weight of glass. It was far more impact resistant, and it was incredibly resistant to scratches, the very problem the military was trying to solve for its gun sights. In 1947, Armorlight introduced the first CR39 plastic eyeglass lenses. They were a revolution. They were safer, more comfortable, and more durable than anything that had come before. Today, the vast majority of eyeglass lenses sold are made from plastic, and CR39 is still one of the most widely used materials in the optical industry. A material that was a footnote in a military research program for aircraft parts ended up changing how millions of people see the world every day. It protected eyes not from enemy fire, but from the simple everyday hazards of a dropped pair of glasses. But what if the formula for CR39 had been lost or forgotten after the war? Would we still be wearing heavy breakable glass lenses today? How many other failed military chemical compounds are sitting in old archives, holding the potential for some other, completely unrelated breakthrough? And does the long, slow journey of CR39 from a lab to our faces show that the true application of an invention might take years, or even decades, to become clear? Number 15, how did a simple gas can change the way the world moves? Before the Second World War, moving fuel was a surprisingly messy and inefficient business. The British used flimsy square tins that were prone to leaking. A significant portion of the fuel would be lost before it ever reached a vehicle. The Americans used a standard 10-gallon can that required a separate funnel and tools to open and use. It was slow, cumbersome, and easy to spill. In a war that was becoming increasingly mechanized, fuel was lifeblood. Wasting it was not an option. The German military, however, had a secret weapon. It wasn't a tank or a plane. They called it the Wehrmacht Einheitskanister. We know it today as the Jerrycan. The name Jerry was slang for a German soldier. The can was a masterpiece of practical design. It was created in the late 1930s by an engineer named Vinzenz Grunvogel at the Muller Company. The design was simple but brilliant. It held 20 liters, or about 5 gallons, of fuel. It had 3 handles, which meant one person could carry 2 full cans, or 2 people could easily carry 1. The spout had an air pipe, which allowed the fuel to pour out smoothly without gurgling or splashing. The cap was attached and had a cantilever closure that made it quick to open and close without any tools. And the can was flat-sided, so it could be stacked efficiently for transport. The Allies first became aware of this superior design during the early stages of the war. They captured some of the cans and realized how much better they were. An American engineer named Paul Pleiss was traveling through Berlin before the U.S. entered the war. He saw the cans and, with a German partner, built a vehicle to travel to India. They took 3 of the cans with them. He understood their value immediately. When he eventually made it back to the United States, he tried to convince the military to adopt the design. But American officials were dismissive. They thought their own can was good enough. The British were more receptive. They captured several Jerrycans during the North African campaign and immediately began to reverse engineer them. Soon, they were producing millions of their own copies. The U.S. military eventually came around, but their initial version had a flaw. They insisted on a screw cap instead of the simple lever, which still required a tool. It wasn't until later that they adopted the full, brilliant design. The Jerrycan was so effective that it was used by all sides. President Roosevelt himself reportedly noted in 1944, "Without these cans, it would have been impossible for our armies to cut their way across France at a lightning pace." It was a piece of enemy technology that was so good it had to be copied. After the war, the Jerrycan design became the global standard. It is still used today for carrying fuel and water all over the world. Its design is so iconic and functional that it has barely changed in over 80 years. It's a testament to the power of smart, simple engineering. It proves that sometimes the most important inventions aren't the most complex ones, but the ones that solve a basic problem perfectly. But what if Paul Pleiss had never seen those cans in Berlin? How much longer would the Allies have struggled with their inefficient fuel transport? How many critical innovations from an opposing side are dismissed out of pride or bureaucracy? And is the Jerrycan a reminder that a good idea is a good idea no matter where it comes from? Number 14, could a chocolate candy designed for soldiers become a global treat? In the 1930s, Forrest Mars Sr., the son of the founder of the Mars Candy Company, had a falling out with his father. He moved to England and started his own confectionery business. During a trip to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, he observed soldiers eating small pellets of chocolate. These chocolates were covered in a hard, sugary shell. This shell kept the chocolate from melting in the soldiers' hands or in the warm weather. The Mars saw a brilliant idea. He returned to the United States, and in 1941 he partnered with Bruce Murray, the son of the president of the Hershey Chocolate Company. Hershey had control of the ration chocolate at the time. They combined their resources and their last names, E-M-N-M. The result was M&M's plain chocolate candies. The concept was simple, a candy-coated chocolate that wouldn't make a mess. This made it the perfect treat for soldiers. When the United States entered World War II, M&M's found their primary customer. The military saw the value in a high-energy, mess-free, and durable snack for its troops. The candies were sold exclusively to the U.S. Army. They were included in C rations and sent to soldiers all over the world. The cardboard tube packaging made them easy to carry and distribute. For soldiers in the field, far from home, these little candies were a small taste of comfort and normalcy. They were a morale booster that you could eat. The war served as a massive, unintentional marketing campaign for M&Ms. Millions of soldiers were introduced to the candy. When they returned home after the war ended in 1945, they were already loyal customers. They looked for the candy in stores. Mars capitalized on this built-in demand. Production ramped up, and in 1947, the familiar brown bag packaging was introduced. The candy was now available to the public, and it was an instant hit. The slogan, "The milk chocolate melts in your mouth, not in your hand," was introduced in 1954, perfectly capturing the candy's unique, war-tested advantage. M&M's went on to become one of the most recognizable and beloved candies in the world. Different colors were introduced, and peanut M&M's were launched. The iconic M&M's characters became advertising superstars. But it all started with a practical problem: how to give soldiers a chocolate treat that could survive the rigors of a war zone. The candy that was designed to withstand the heat of a soldier's pocket became a staple of movie theaters, lunchboxes, and candy dishes everywhere. But what if Forrest Mars had never taken that trip to Spain? Would another company have stumbled upon the same idea of a candy-coated chocolate? How much of the candy's success was due to its quality, and how much was due to the unique, massive, and captive audience the military provided? And does the story of M&M show that even something as simple as a piece of candy can play a role in a global conflict, not as a weapon, but as a small piece of home? Number 13. What if a way to preserve blood plasma for medics led to your morning coffee? In the midst of World War II, battlefield medicine was advancing rapidly. One of the biggest challenges was treating soldiers for shock caused by blood loss. Medics needed a way to give transfusions quickly and safely on the front lines. Whole blood was difficult to transport and store. It required refrigeration and had a short shelf life. The solution was blood plasma. Plasma could be dried into a powder, shipped easily, and then reconstituted with sterile water when needed. The process used to dry the plasma was called freeze-drying or lyophilization. The technique had been known for some time, but the war created an urgent need to perfect it and scale it up. The National Research Corporation, founded by Richard S. Morse, was a key player. They developed advanced freeze-drying techniques that allowed the U.S. to produce huge quantities of dried blood plasma and penicillin, another critical wartime medical supply. This technology saved countless lives. It allowed medics to carry the equivalent of life-saving blood in a small, stable package. When the war ended, the demand for freeze-dried blood plasma dropped significantly. The companies that had built this massive industrial capacity for freeze-drying were left with a problem. They had all this amazing technology, but their main customer, the military, no longer needed it on such a large scale. They had to find a new use for it. The answer came not in the hospital, but in the kitchen. The U.S. government, still interested in food preservation for military rations, funded further research. In the 1950s, Nestle, which had already developed an earlier form of instant coffee, began to explore freeze-drying as a way to improve the quality of their product. Traditional spray drying methods for making instant coffee involved high heat, which could destroy much of the coffee's natural aroma and flavor. Freeze drying was different. It worked by freezing the coffee and then placing it in a strong vacuum. The vacuum caused the frozen water in the coffee to turn directly into vapor, a process called sublimation. This removed the water without high heat, preserving more of the delicate compounds that give coffee its taste and smell. In 1965, Nestle launched Taster's Choice in the United States, the first major freeze-dried instant coffee. It was a huge improvement over older instant coffees. It had a richer, more authentic flavor. The technology that was perfected to save soldiers' lives on the battlefield had found a new, peaceful purpose, making a better, more convenient cup of coffee. It eventually spread to other foods as well, from astronaut ice cream to freeze-dried fruits in breakfast cereals. It's a direct line of innovation, from a medics kit in a war zone to the coffee cup on your breakfast table. But what if the war had not created the urgent need to scale up freeze-drying technology? Would we have discovered its potential for food preservation so quickly? How many other advanced industrial processes from the war are now part of our daily lives in ways we don't even recognize? And is it strange to think that the technology behind a quick cup of coffee was honed in the desperate effort to treat the wounded? Number 12, did the fight against malaria in the Pacific give us hairspray and air freshener? The war in the Pacific was fought in jungles and on islands where the enemy wasn't just human, it was also the mosquito. Malaria and other insect-borne diseases were a massive threat to Allied troops. In some campaigns, more soldiers were taken out of action by disease than by combat. The U.S. Department of Agriculture was tasked with finding a better way to protect the troops from these insects. The problem was how to dispense insecticide effectively. Swatting mosquitoes one by one was not a solution. They needed a way to create a fine mist of bug killer that could hang in the air in a tent or a barracks, killing all the insects inside. There are two researchers at the Eustis Research Center in Beltsville, Maryland, Lyle Goodhue and William Sullivan, took on the challenge. In 1941, they developed what they called the aerosol bomb. Their invention was a small, portable, pressurized can. It was filled with a liquefied gas like Freon and the active insecticide. When the user pressed a valve, the pressure was released, forcing the mixture out as a fine spray. The propellant would evaporate almost instantly, leaving a cloud of tiny insecticide particles suspended in the air. It was incredibly effective. The military ordered millions of these bug bombs. They were a standard issue item for troops serving in the Pacific Theater. They undoubtedly saved thousands of lives by preventing the spread of disease. And after the war, the inventors and the companies that manufactured the cans saw the huge commercial potential of this technology. The basic principle of the aerosol can be using a pressurized propellant to dispense a product as a fine mist could be applied to almost anything. The heavy, high-pressure steel cans used in the war were replaced by lightweight, low-pressure aluminum cans, making them cheap and safe for home use. The first consumer product to use the technology was, unsurprisingly, insecticide, but soon other applications followed. In 1949, Helene Curtis launched SprayNet, one of the first aerosol hairsprays. It was a runaway success. Women loved the convenience. Then came spray on deodorant, whipped cream, spray paint, air fresheners, cooking spray, and shaving cream. The aerosol can transform entire industries. It created a new level of convenience for consumers. The simple act of pressing a button to get a perfectly even spray was revolutionary. The bug bomb that was designed to clear out barracks in Guadalcanal became the hairspray on a vanity table in suburbia. It's a powerful example of how a very specific military technology can be adapted into a platform for countless everyday products. The world we live in, filled with convenient sprays, is a direct descendant of the fight against mosquitoes in a faraway jungle. But what if Goodhue and Sullivan had failed to create a portable dispenser? Would the fight against insect-borne disease in the war have been much harder? How many other industries would be different today without the simple, elegant solution of the aerosol can? And does the widespread environmental concern over CFC propellants, which were used for decades, show that even the most useful inventions can have long-term unforeseen consequences? Number 11. How did a material for sealing army jeeps become the ultimate household fix? Duct tape is a part of our cultural fabric. We use it to fix everything from leaky pipes to broken car bumpers. It's been used on a NASA mission to save astronauts' lives, but its story starts with a simple, practical wartime problem keeping things dry. During World War II, the U.S. military needed a strong, durable, waterproof tape. They used it for a variety of tasks, but one of the most important was sealing ammunition boxes. The standard issue paper tape they were using would often fail in wet or humid conditions, allowing moisture to get in and potentially ruin the ammunition. This was a serious issue. The idea for a better solution came from a woman named Vesta Stout. She was a mother of 2 sons serving in the Navy, and she worked at the Green River Ordnance Plant in Illinois, packing and inspecting ammunition cartridges. She saw firsthand how flimsy the paper tape was and worried that it would endanger her sons and other soldiers. So she came up with an idea for a different kind of tape. A tape made from a strong cloth fabric, coated with a waterproof plastic and with a powerful adhesive. She brought her idea to her supervisors, but they were not interested. Undeterred, Vesta Stout did something remarkable. On February 10th, 1943, she sat down and wrote a letter directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. She explained the problem clearly and outlined her solution with diagrams. The letter made its way through the government bureaucracy and landed on the right desk. The War Production Board saw the merit in her idea and tasked a company that was already a leader in medical tapes, Johnson & Johnson, with developing the product. Johnson & Johnson's Permacell division created the tape exactly as Stout had imagined. It had a rubber-based adhesive, a mesh cloth backing for strength, and a waterproof olive drab green coating of polyethylene. The soldiers loved it. It was strong, it was waterproof, and you could tear it with your hands. They started calling it duck tape. The origin of the name is debated. Some say it's because the water rolled off it like a duck's back. Others say it's because the cloth backing was made from cotton duck fabric. Whatever the reason, the name stuck. The soldiers used it for everything, repairing tents, fixing equipment, even as a makeshift bandage. It was the ultimate quick fix. After the war, the soldiers came home, and they brought their love for this versatile tape with them. A huge housing boom in the post-war years, a new application for the tape emerged, sealing the joints in heating and air conditioning ductwork. To match the silver color of the ducts, the tape's color was changed from army green to the familiar silver gray we know today. And the name evolved from duct tape to duct tape. It became a staple in every toolbox and hardware store in America. The simple, life-saving invention of a factory worker and concerned mother became a symbol of American ingenuity and resourcefulness. But what if Vesta Stout's letter had been lost in the mail or ignored by a government official? Would the military have continued to struggle with failing ammunition boxes? How many other simple, brilliant ideas from ordinary factory workers were overlooked during the war? And is there a certain irony that a product named duct tape is now often not recommended for use on actual ducts, as studies have shown it can fail under long-term heating and cooling cycles? Number 10. Could a better way to make plastic lead to food that stays fresh for weeks? Plastic was a critical material during World War II. It was used in everything from aircraft canopies to radio components, but one of the most common plastics, polyethylene, was difficult to make. It required incredibly high pressures, around 1,000 times normal atmospheric pressure. This made it expensive and dangerous to produce. There had to be a better way. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. During the war, a German chemist named Karl Ziegler was working at the Max Planck Institute for Coal Research. His work was not directly related to weapons, but focused on fundamental chemistry. He was experimenting with organometallic compounds, trying to find new ways to link small molecules together to form long polymer chains. After the war, he continued his research. In 1953, he made a remarkable discovery. He found a new type of catalyst, a combination of titanium compounds and aluminum alkyls, that could produce polyethylene at normal atmospheric pressures. This was a revolutionary development. It made producing high-density polyethylene HDP much cheaper, safer, and more efficient. At the same time, an Italian chemist named Julio Nada was working for the Montecatini company. He learned of Ziegler's work and expanded on it. He used similar catalysts to create a new type of plastic, polypropylene. This plastic was strong, lightweight, and could withstand high temperatures. The work of these two men, who would later share the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1963, created a whole new family of plastics. One of the people who saw the potential of these new materials was an American inventor named Earl Tupper. And Tupper had been working with plastics since before the war, even developing materials for the military. After the war, he got his hands on a purified, waste-free form of polyethylene, a byproduct of the oil refining process. He molded this plastic into a series of lightweight, non-breakable containers for food storage. But he had a problem. He couldn't figure out how to create a good, airtight lid. The inspiration came from a can of paint. Tupper noticed how a paint can lid fits securely, creating an airtight and liquid-tight seal that could be opened and closed many times. He designed a similar burping seal for his plastic containers. You would press the center of the lid to push the air out, creating a partial vacuum that kept food fresh. He patented this seal in 1949. This was the birth of Tupperware, Initially, Tupperware didn't sell well in stores. People didn't understand how the special seal worked. The product needed a demonstration. The solution was the famous Tupperware party. A woman named Brownie Wise, a former sales representative, pioneered the home party model. It was a perfect fit for post-war suburban America. Friends would gather, see the products demonstrated, and place orders. It was a massive success, empowering a generation of women to earn their own income. The combination of wartime advances in polymer chemistry and a clever paint-inspired seal created a cultural and commercial icon that changed the way we store food. But what if Carl Ziegler had never discovered his low-pressure catalyst? Would high-quality plastic still be an expensive industrial material rather than a common household item? How did the post-war social structure of suburbia contribute to the success of a product that initially failed in traditional retail? And does the current environmental concern over plastic waste make us reevaluate the legacy of this wartime-era revolution in materials? Number 9. What if the secret to all-weather flying was developed to keep bombers safe? Flying in the 1930s and early 1940s was still a risky business. One of the biggest dangers was altitude. As an aircraft climbed higher, the air became thinner and the pressure dropped. For the crew, this could lead to hypoxia, a dangerous condition where the body is deprived of sufficient oxygen. It caused dizziness, confusion, and eventually unconsciousness. Military aircraft could fly high to avoid enemy anti-aircraft fire and bad weather, but their crews were limited by how long they could endure the harsh conditions, even with oxygen masks. During World War II, this problem became critical. Long-range bombers needed to fly at very high altitudes, above 30,000 feet, to be safe and effective. At these heights, oxygen masks alone were not enough. The low pressure could also cause a painful and dangerous condition called the bends, similar to what deep-sea divers experience. The military needed a way to create an artificial environment inside the aircraft, one that mimicked the air pressure at a much lower, safer altitude. The answer was the pressurized cabin. The concept wasn't entirely new. A prototype had been flown in the 1920s, but the war provided the funding and the urgent need to perfect the technology for large, complex aircraft. Boeing took the lead with its B-29 Superfortress bomber. This was one of the most technologically advanced aircraft of the war. Developing a reliable pressurization system for a plane that large was a massive engineering challenge. The engineers had to create a fuselage strong enough to withstand the pressure difference between the inside and the outside air. It was like trying to make a giant sealed metal balloon. They had to develop new seals for doors and windows and a complex system of pumps and valves to maintain the pressure. The B-29 had a system that could maintain an internal cabin pressure equivalent to 8,000 feet, even when the plane was flying at 30,000 feet. It allowed the crew to operate for long hours in relative comfort and safety without bulky pressure suits. It dramatically increased the effectiveness and range of strategic bombing missions. After the war, this military technology was immediately transferred to the burgeoning civilian airline industry. The age of the passenger jet was just beginning, and pressurization was the key to making it work. It allowed airliners like the Boeing 707 and the Douglas DC-8 to fly high above the weather in the jet stream, where they could travel faster and more smoothly. Passengers could fly from New York to London in a matter of hours in a comfortable, climate-controlled cabin. The pressurized cabin made modern air travel possible. Every time you fly on a commercial airplane, you are benefiting directly from the technology that was developed to keep bomber crews safe at high altitudes. The comfort and convenience of sitting in a t-shirt at 35,000 feet is a direct legacy of a critical piece of wartime aviation engineering. But what if the engineering challenges of pressurizing a large aircraft like the B-29 had proven to be insurmountable? Would the development of commercial jet travel have been delayed by decades? How did the experience of maintaining these complex systems in wartime contribute to the safety standards of modern airlines? And is it a strange thought that the peaceful experience of watching a movie on a long-haul flight is enabled by a technology forged for a very different and much more dangerous purpose? Number 8, did the push for a faster way to break codes accidentally create the modern world? In the heat of World War II, information was the most valuable weapon. Both sides used complex encryption machines to send secret messages. Breaking these codes could reveal enemy plans, ship movements, and military strategies. It could change the course of a battle, or even the war. In Britain, a top-secret team of mathematicians, engineers, and linguists was gathered at a country estate called Bletchley Park. Their job was to crack the formidable codes used by the German military. One of the most complex codes was generated by the Lorenz cipher machine, used for high-level communications. The code was incredibly difficult to break by hand. The mathematicians at Bletchley Park, including Alan Turing and Bill Tuday, had figured out the mathematical principles behind the machine. But doing the calculations to decipher a single message could take weeks. They needed a machine to do the work. An engineer named Tommy Flowers, who worked for the General Post Office, was brought in to help. He believed he could build a machine that could do the job and do it fast. He proposed building a machine that used a huge number of vacuum tubes, about 1,500 of them. At the time, this was a radical idea. Vacuum tubes were notoriously unreliable. Most people believed a machine with that many tubes would break down constantly. But Flowers was an expert. He knew how to make them reliable. His machine was called Colossus. It was the world's first large-scale, programmable electronic digital computer. The first one, Mark I, was operational in early 1944. It was massive, filling a room. It read the encrypted message from a paper tape at a speed of 5,000 characters per second and performed complex logical operations to figure out the settings of the Lorenz machine. It was a stunning success. It could do in hours what had previously taken weeks. An improved Colossus Mark II was built, and by the end of the war, there were 10 Colossus computers working around the clock at Bletchley Park, providing crucial intelligence. At the same time, in the United States, a similar need was driving a different project. The U.S. Army needed to calculate artillery firing tables. These were complex equations that told gunners how to aim their weapons to hit a target. Doing these calculations by hand was slow and prone to error. At the University of Pennsylvania, two men, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert, were building a machine to automate this process. Their machine was called the ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It was even bigger than Colossus, with over 17,000 vacuum tubes. It was completed in 1945, too late to be used for its original wartime purpose, but it was a marvel of engineering. These two machines, Colossus and ENIAC, born from the urgent needs of war, were the ancestors of every computer, smartphone, and digital device we use today. The principles of electronic computation, binary logic, and programmability that they pioneered laid the foundation for the entire digital revolution. The secret work at Bletchley Park and the artillery calculations at the University of Pennsylvania accidentally kicked off the information age. After the war, the technology spread, vacuum tubes were replaced by transistors, and computers got smaller, faster, and more powerful, eventually changing every aspect of human life. But what if Tommy Flowers had listened to the skeptics and never built his vacuum tube computer? How much longer would the war have lasted without the intelligence from Bletchley Park? If the immediate pressure of war hadn't been there, how long would it have taken for humanity to invent the electronic computer? And is it the ultimate paradox that the machines that now connect the world were born from the desperate need to defeat an enemy? Number 7, how did a way to spot enemy planes lead to reheating leftovers in a minute? During the 1930s, as the threat of war grew, Britain was vulnerable to air attack. They needed an early warning system, a way to see enemy bombers coming long before they reached the coast. The solution was radar, which stands for radio detection and ranging. A Scottish physicist named Robert Watson Watt and his team developed a system called Chain Home. It used a series of large radio transmitters to send out pulses of radio waves. When these waves hit an aircraft, they would bounce back and be picked up by a receiver. By measuring the time it took for the echo to return, they could determine the distance and location of the plane. Radar was a crucial defensive weapon. It played a key role in the Battle of Britain, allowing the Royal Air Force to intercept incoming attacks effectively. The technology was constantly improving. One of the most important developments was the cavity magnetron. This was a device developed in 1940 by John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham. It could generate powerful, high-frequency radio waves or microwaves. This allowed for much smaller, more precise radar systems that could be installed in aircraft and on ships. It was a major technological leap, a secret weapon that gave the Allies a significant advantage. One of the companies that became a major producer of these magnetrons was the Raytheon Company in the United States. After the war, Raytheon was, like many companies, looking for new peaceful applications for its military technology. An American engineer at Raytheon named Percy Spencer was an expert in radar technology. In 1945, he was working on an active radar set when he noticed something strange. A chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. He was intrigued. He was a self-taught engineer with a curious mind. He decided to experiment. He pointed the magnetron tube at some popcorn kernels. They started popping all over the lab. The next day, he tried it with an egg. the egg exploded. Spencer realized that the microwaves from the magnetron were agitating the water molecules in the food, generating heat. He had discovered a new way to cook. Raytheon saw the commercial potential. They developed a prototype, a metal box with a magnetron inside. The first commercial microwave oven was called the Rataranch. It was unveiled in 1947. It was huge, standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 750 pounds. It also cost about $5,000, the equivalent of over $60,000 today. It was sold primarily to restaurants and institutions. It took another 2 decades for the technology to become small enough and cheap enough for home use. In 1967, Amana, a division of Raytheon, introduced the first countertop microwave oven. It was a hit. It changed the way people cooked and ate. It offered incredible speed and convenience. The ability to heat up last night's dinner in a minute was a revolution in the kitchen. And it all started with a device that was designed to detect enemy planes in the dark. But what if Percy Spencer hadn't had that candy bar in his pocket that day? How long would it have taken for someone else to discover the heating properties of microwaves? How did the massive wartime investment in radar technology accelerate this completely unrelated discovery? And is it remarkable to think that like a core technology of modern kitchen convenience is a direct descendant of a top secret military weapon? Number 6, could a flu shot developed for soldiers be the reason we survive winter? Pandemics have always been a threat to armies. In 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic killed more people than the First World War itself, including hundreds of thousands of soldiers. As the United States prepared to enter World War II, military planners were terrified of a repeat. They knew that a flu outbreak in the crowded conditions of military barracks and transport ships could be devastating. It could cripple the army before it even reached the battlefield. The U.S. military needed a vaccine. At the time, influenza was still a mysterious disease. Scientists had only recently confirmed that it was caused by a virus, not a bacteria. The challenge was taken up by a commission of scientists and researchers, funded by the U.S. Army. 2 key figures in this effort were Dr. Thomas Francis Jr. and Dr. Jonas Salk, working at the University of Michigan. Salk would, of course, later become famous for developing the polio vaccine. Their research was a race against time. They figured out how to grow the influenza virus in fertilized chicken eggs, a method still used today. This allowed them to produce large quantities of the virus. Then, they developed a way to inactivate or kill the virus with a chemical called formalin. The killed virus could no longer cause the disease, but it could still trigger the body's immune system to create antibodies. This was the basis for the first effective inactivated flu vaccine. In 1943, the first large-scale clinical trials of the vaccine were conducted on U.S. soldiers. The results were a resounding success. The vaccine was shown to be safe and highly effective at preventing the flu. The Army immediately began a massive vaccination program. By the end of the war, millions of soldiers had been vaccinated. The feared wartime flu pandemic never happened. The vaccine was a quiet, unsung hero of the war, a medical breakthrough that protected the fighting force. After the war, the vaccine was made available to the civilian population. The research continued as scientists realized that the influenza virus was constantly mutating, requiring a new vaccine formulation almost every year. The global surveillance system for tracking flu strains, the annual ritual of getting a flu shot, and the basic technology of the vaccine itself are all direct legacies of this urgent wartime project. The effort to protect soldiers from a potential pandemic laid the groundwork for a public health tool that saves countless lives around the world every year. You know, it's a clear line from the military's fear of a 1918 repeat to the shot in the arm we get at the local pharmacy. The need to keep an army healthy accelerated vaccine development in a way that might have taken many more years in peacetime. But what if Francis and Salk had not been successful in developing an effective vaccine? Could a flu outbreak have significantly altered the course of the war? How did the logistics of vaccinating millions of soldiers in a short time inform later public health campaigns? And does this story prove that some of the most important victories in a war are not won on the battlefield, but in the laboratory? Number 5, did the need for a faster fighter plane pave the way for your last vacation? At the beginning of World War II, fighter planes were powered by piston engines and propellers. They were powerful, but they had a ceiling. There was a limit to how fast they could fly. As the war progressed, the race for air superiority became a race for speed. Engineers in both Germany and Britain were working on a radical new form of propulsion, the jet engine. The principle was simple. Air is sucked into the front of the engine, compressed, mixed with fuel, and ignited. The resulting explosion of hot gas rushes out the back, pushing the aircraft forward. A German engineer named Hans von Ohain and a British Royal Air Force officer named Frank Whittle were working on the concept independently in the late 1930s. The war provided a massive injection of funding and urgency into their research. The first jet-powered aircraft to see combat were the German Messerschmitt Me 262 and the British Gloster Meteor. They were incredibly fast, much faster than any propeller-driven plane. They represented the future of aviation. While they arrived too late to have a decisive impact on the outcome of the war, they proved the viability of jet propulsion. The sound and speed of these new aircraft were a sign that a new age in flight was beginning. After the war, the jet engine technology was declassified and shared. The potential for civilian air travel was obvious. Propeller planes were slow. A transatlantic flight was a long, noisy, and often bumpy ordeal. Jet engines could power aircraft to fly much higher above the weather and at nearly twice the speed. In 1952, the British company de Havilland introduced the Comet, the world's first commercial jet airliner. It was a marvel. It was sleek, fast, and quiet for the passengers inside. It cut travel times in half. However, a series of tragic crashes due to metal fatigue grounded the fleet and set back the British aviation industry. It was the American company, Boeing, that truly brought the jet age to the masses. In 1958, they introduced the Boeing 707. Pan American World Airways used it for its New York to Paris route. It was a huge success. The jet engine, a technology that was born from the military quest for a faster fighter plane, completely transformed the world. It made international travel accessible and affordable for ordinary people. It connected cultures, fueled global business, and created the modern tourism industry. The world became a smaller place. Every time we board a plane to go on vacation or a business trip, we are harnessing a power that was first unleashed in the desperate race for military advantage. But what if the development of the jet engine had been delayed by a decade? Would the world be as interconnected as it is today? How did the intense competition of wartime accelerate a technological leap that might have taken much longer in a peaceful world? And is there a disconnect between the jet engine's origin as a weapon of war and its modern role as a tool of global connection and leisure? Number 4. What if a chemical mistake while making gun sights gave us unbreakable glue? In 1942, Dr. Harry Coover was a chemist working at a research lab for Eastman Kodak. His project was part of the war effort. He was trying to create a new optically clear plastic that could be used for precision gun sights on Allied weapons. He was experimenting with the classic chemicals called cyanoacrylates. One of the formulations he created was a total failure for his intended purpose. It wasn't stable, it was incredibly sticky. It would bond to absolutely everything it touched. It was a nuisance. It glued his instruments together, it ruined his samples. Frustrated, Coover and his team set the chemical aside. It was a useless, annoying substance. They moved on to other experiments. The war ended. Years passed. In 1951, Coover was working at a Kodak research facility in Tennessee. He was leading a different project now, this time trying to develop a heat-resistant polymer for jet canopies. A member of his research team, Fred Welling, was testing various cyanoacrylate compounds again. Welling put a drop of the chemical between two expensive refractometer prisms to test its optical properties. A moment later, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. The two prisms were permanently bonded together. They were ruined. It was in that moment of frustration and expensive failure that Coover had his flash of insight. He remembered the annoying, sticky chemical from 9 years earlier. He realized he had been looking at it all wrong. The problem wasn't that it was sticky. The feature was that it was sticky. It wasn't a failed plastic. It was an amazing adhesive. It was a unique kind of glue. It didn't need heat or pressure. It didn't need a catalyst. It worked with just the trace amounts of water vapor that are present on almost every surface, and it formed an incredibly strong bond almost instantly. Coover convinced Kodak of the product's potential. In 1958, it was released to the public under the name Eastman 910. It was later licensed and sold under the brand name we all know, Super Glue. The glue that was an accidental byproduct of a search for a better gun sight became a household staple. It was even used in the Vietnam War by medics to quickly seal wounds on the battlefield, buying precious time to get a soldier to a hospital. A chemical that was twice dismissed as a failure turned out to be one of the most useful and successful consumer products ever invented, all because a chemist finally realized its true purpose. But what if Fred Welling had been more careful and had not glued those expensive prisms together? Would the potential of cyanoacrylates as an adhesive have remained undiscovered for even longer? How many other failed experiments are sitting on lab shelves, their true value unrecognized? And is the story of superglue a perfect lesson in how innovation is often not about a single moment of genius, but about the ability to see a new possibility in an old mistake? Number 3, how did a way to make stronger fighter planes create the modern kitchen? Before World War II, aluminum was still a relatively expensive, specialized material. The most common way to join pieces of metal was by riveting or welding. But for building aircraft like these methods had drawbacks, like rivets added weight and created drag. Welding could weaken the lightweight aluminum alloys used for aircraft skin. The aircraft industry needed a better way to build stronger, lighter, and more aerodynamic planes. The answer came in the form of improved adhesives. In Britain, a scientist named Norman de Bruyne, who founded a company called Aero Research Limited, was a pioneer in this field. In 1941, he developed a new type of adhesive called Redux. It was a synthetic resin adhesive that could be used to bond metal to metal or metal to wood. It created a bond that was incredibly strong and durable. The British de Havilland Hornet, one of the fastest piston engine fighters of the war, was one of the first aircraft to be built using this metal bonding technique. It allowed for a smoother, stronger, and lighter airframe. This was a major advance in aircraft construction. At the same time, companies in the United States were also working on new materials. A key innovation was the development of Teflon, or polytetrafluoroethylene PTFE. It was discovered by accident in 1938 by a chemist at DuPont named Roy Plunkett. He was working on new refrigerants. He opened a pressurized cylinder that was supposed to contain a gas, but nothing came out. The cylinder wasn't empty, though. It was heavier than it should have been. He cut it open and found a strange, waxy white powder inside. The gas had polymerized. This new substance had amazing properties. It was incredibly slippery. Almost nothing would stick to it. And it was highly resistant to heat and chemical corrosion. During the war, it was a top secret material. It was used in artillery shell fuses and in the production of nuclear materials. It was valuable, but its production was limited and its use was restricted to the military. After the war, both of these technologies, strong new adhesives and the super slippery Teflon, became available for commercial use. A French engineer named Marc Gregoire had an idea. His wife Colette was always complaining about her pots and pans and how food would stick to them. Marc used his engineering skills to figure out a way to bond the slippery Teflon to an aluminum pan. The problem was getting it to stick. He used a process of etching the aluminum to create a rough surface which allowed the Teflon to adhere. In 1954, he patented the process. He and his wife started a company called Tefal. In 1956, they were producing their first non-stick pans. An American journalist discovered them, and the idea took off in the United States. The non-stick frying pan was a revolution in the kitchen. It made cooking and cleaning up much easier. The technology that was developed to build faster planes and for secret military projects ended up in kitchens all around the world. The smooth, easy-to-clean surface of a modern frying pan is a direct result of wartime advances in materials science. But what if Norman de Bruyne's adhesive had failed? Or if Roy Plunkett had just discarded that strange cylinder without investigating? How many of our modern kitchen conveniences are based on technologies that we don't even know were born from military research? And does it change how you see your frying pan, knowing that its origins lie in the construction of a fighter plane? Number 2, did the need for better tires drive one of the biggest government projects in history? In 1941, the United States was facing a rubber crisis. The country was almost entirely dependent on natural rubber imported from plantations in Southeast Asia. When Japan entered the war and quickly conquered these regions, that supply was cut off. This was a national emergency. Rubber was not a luxury. It was the lifeblood of both the military and the civilian economy. It was needed for the tires on every single army truck, jeep, and airplane. It was needed for hoses, belts, and seals in every factory. The United States had a very small stockpile of natural rubber, enough to last for about a year. After that, the war machine would grind to a halt. The government had to act, and act fast. In 1942, President Roosevelt launched one of the largest and most ambitious government-led technology projects in American history, the U.S. Synthetic Rubber Program. The goal was to create an entire industry from scratch in just a couple of years. The government brought together the country's top four rubber companies, Firestone, Goodyear, B.F. Goodrich, and U.S. Rubber, along with chemical companies, oil companies, and university researchers. They were fierce competitors, but they were forced to share their patents and work together for the national good. The basic chemistry for synthetic rubber was known. A German process from the 1930s created a type of rubber called Buna S. The American program focused on improving and mass-producing this type of rubber, which they called Government Rubber Styrene, or GRS. It was made from two chemical components, butadiene and styrene, which were byproducts of the petroleum industry. The scale of the project was staggering. The government funded the construction of 51 new factories across the country. It was an investment of over $700 million, a colossal sum at the time. Thousands of chemists and engineers worked around the clock to solve the complex technical problems of scaling up production. By 1944, the program was a stunning success. The United States was producing over 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber per year, more than the entire world's production of natural rubber before the war. This massive wartime effort not only solved the immediate crisis, but it also created the modern synthetic materials industry. After the war, synthetic rubber became a staple of the global economy. It was cheaper and in many ways more durable than natural rubber. It's used today in countless products, from car tires and shoe soles to medical equipment and industrial hoses. The giant petrochemical plants that were built for the war became the foundation for the post-war boom in plastics and other synthetic materials. The race to keep the Army's trucks rolling ended up fundamentally reshaping the material world we live in. But what if the competing companies had refused to cooperate and the synthetic rubber program had failed? Could the outcome of the war have been different? How did this massive government-led project influence the relationship between science, industry, and the state for decades to come? And is the story of synthetic rubber a powerful example of what can be achieved when a nation is united by a common, urgent purpose? Number 1. Was the most important medical discovery of the 20th century an unusable novelty until war? Made it a necessity? In 1928, a Scottish scientist named Alexander Fleming was studying bacteria at St. Mary's Hospital in London. He returned from a vacation to find a stack of petri dishes he had left on his lab bench. On one of the dishes, a spot of mold was growing, but around the mold, there was a clear ring where the bacteria had been killed. Fleming was intrigued. He isolated the mold and found that it was producing a substance that was lethal to many common bacteria. He called this substance penicillin. Fleming published his findings in 1929, but the discovery didn't make much of a splash. The problem was that producing penicillin was incredibly difficult. It was unstable, and he could only produce it in very small, impure quantities. It was a fascinating scientific curiosity, but it wasn't a practical medicine. For over a decade, penicillin remained a laboratory novelty. Then came World War II. The war created a terrible, urgent need for a way to treat bacterial infections. On the battlefield, more soldiers died from infected wounds than from the initial injuries themselves. A simple cut or a piece of shrapnel could lead to a deadly infection. The existing antibacterial drugs, sulfa drugs, were somewhat effective, but they had many limitations. A team of scientists at Oxford University, led by Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, decided to take another look at Fleming's forgotten discovery. In 1940, they managed to purify a small amount of penicillin. They tested it on mice that had been infected with lethal bacteria. The untreated mice died. The mice treated with penicillin survived. It was a miracle, but they still had the problem of production. They were growing the mold in any container they could find, including hospital bedpans. They could barely produce enough to treat a single human patient. With Britain under constant attack and its resources stretched thin, they knew they couldn't scale up production there. In 1941, Florey and a colleague traveled to the United States to seek help. They went to a government research lab in Peoria, Illinois. The American government, seeing the immense potential for the war effort, launched a massive, coordinated program to mass-produce penicillin. They brought in pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Merck, and Squibb. Researchers scoured the world for better strains of the penicillin mold. A particularly productive strain was found on a moldy cantaloupe in a Peoria market. Scientists developed new techniques for growing the mold in huge, deep fermentation tanks, like the ones used in breweries. By 1943, they were producing enough penicillin to treat a few hundred soldiers. By the D-Day invasion in June 1944, They had produced enough to treat every single Allied soldier who needed it. It was an industrial and medical triumph. Penicillin saved countless lives during the war. It dramatically reduced the death rate from infections and amputations. After the war, this miracle drug became available to the public. It ushered in the age of antibiotics. Diseases that had once been a death sentence, pneumonia, scarlet fever, syphilis, were now easily curable. The mass production of penicillin, driven by the desperate needs of war, was arguably one of the most important events in the history of medicine. It changed humanity's relationship with disease forever. The war didn't invent penicillin, but it took it off the shelf and turned it into the world-changing medicine it was meant to be. But what if Florey and Shane had not decided to revisit Fleming's old research? What if the American companies had been unable to solve the massive challenge of mass production? How many millions more would have died, both in the war and in the decades that followed? And is the story of penicillin the ultimate proof that sometimes, even in the darkest of times, the drive to save lives can lead to humanity's greatest achievements?